All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in for tonight's live stream presentation with Peak and the Los Alamos Mountaineers. As you might know, Peak is the Pajarito Environmental Education Center, which is the nonprofit that operates the Los Alamos Nature Center. And my name is Rachel. I'm the marketing manager at Peak, and I'll be your moderator tonight. As you might know, the Nature Center is back open to the public, which is very exciting. So you can check out our website, which is peaknature.org, to find out more about our upcoming events like this one, both in person and virtual, as well as our open hours. We hope you'll stop by and see us if you haven't. We've loved seeing everyone's bright shining faces after about a year of being closed. So yeah, it's been wonderful to be back open and be able to do both some virtual as well as in-person events. I would like to send a quick shout out to our wonderful members and donors who have made the last year plus possible for all of us. So thank you so much if you are out there watching for your support. And tonight we'll be hearing from Kristen Honig, who will discuss her adventures in Iceland. But before that, we'll get started with the Mountaineers meeting. So with all of that, I am going to hand things over to Melanie, who will introduce tonight's Mountaineers meeting.
Good evening, everybody. This is Melanie Hand. I'm the president of the Los Alamos Mountaineers for 2021. And we've got a great show for you tonight. But before that, just wanted to make a few quick announcements. I wanted to let you know that, the interviews of Los Alamos Mountaineers have begun. And our first interview is of Dave Brown. We're just putting the finishing touches on that video, and it will be available on YouTube very soon for your viewing pleasure. The next thing is that we are planning, as the board is planning a coming out party for September. Basically what we're talking about is we hope to see people again after this long pandemic, and we thought that instead of waiting all the way till December when we normally have our potpourri, that maybe we should get together for an in-person club event sometime in September. We're still in the planning stages of that event, so we will give you more information as it develops. So with that, I will just turn it over to Cecile, and she can talk about trips, and Tony Taylor will also help introduce our speaker for tonight. So thanks again for taking the time to attend our club meeting tonight, and I hope to see you in the upcoming months in person. Thank you.
So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our July meeting. I hope you're all enjoying the beautiful weather we've been having. We're very fortunate to have had frequent rains, and the mountains are just gorgeous. They're very alive with wildflowers and mushrooms of all kinds. So even the local mountains here in the Pajarito, Cañada Bonita, and the Valle are just gorgeous at this time. So I hope you can all go out there and enjoy our trails. So we've had 3 club-sponsored activities last month. Evan Rose led a group of 10 people. They hiked in the Guare Canyon to see the hoodoos. That was on June 25th. And a group returned last week from a rafting trip in southeastern Montana, and I'm going to let Tony Taylor talk about it. She was one of the participants. So Tony.
Actually, the trip was on the Selway River in Idaho. There were,
okay, the description.
It was in Idaho. We flew into Montana.
Okay.
This is our crew with the Selway River in the back. It was led by Bill Fedorsky, and you can see multiple pictures. There were 6 of us that paddled, and Bill fished, and 3 of us just chilled on the rafts. So next slide, please. So you can see the country on the left. You can see the Selway River with the surrounding mountains and forests. On the right top, you can see the picture of some of the paddlers, and there was a guide in the back. And then the bottom right is actually the guides going through our biggest rapid, which was the Wolf Creek Rapid. They didn't let us, we had to walk that because they were afraid we would either get wrapped around one of the rocks or overturn and have to swim. So it was, all in all, it was a fun trip. 6 days, 5 nights, and a real blast. So thanks to Bill for organizing it. And back to Cecile.
Thanks, Tony. The third club sponsored trip was a stay at the Fowler Hilliard Hut, which is part of the 10th Mountain Hut system near Leadville, Colorado. It was led by Kathleen Grutmacher, and I'm just going to read the short report she sent me about that trip. So they met at Camp Hale Trailhead north of Leadville on Monday, July 19th, and they drove up 8 rather rough miles to the hut. On arrival, they were met by a herd of around 1,000 sheep, the sheepdog, 3 horses, and the sheep protector, a llama. And the llama was very protective, and he actually butted Kathleen as soon as she turned her back. They met the shepherd, who was from Mexico and spoke only Spanish, but Karen Grace was on that trip, and she interpreted for him. And they were invited to a taco dinner with the shepherd. And they hiked and biked for 3 days, and they enjoyed absolutely beautiful weather and flowers and views to die for. So I have another picture that shows the horse and the llama, but it sounds like an amazing trip. Now, our individual trips, so those pictures that just members send me of their adventures. So friends, Chris and Bill, they hiked Deception Peak in the Santa Fe Basin. Dave Brown, whom Melanie mentioned in her introduction, one of our longtime mountaineers, has been also hiking this summer. Tony and Stuart, they climbed Thunder Pyramid in Colorado, which is almost a 14er, so very impressive. Looks beautiful. And 2 canyoneering trips by Evan Rose, one in the San Ildefonso Road Canyon, great picture, and the other one in the Ancho Springs Canyon. And then this picture I just received this afternoon, but the photos are by Sylvie Adam, and they hiked and kayaked, it looks like, or rafted on the Green River, and saw some really cool petroglyphs. So our upcoming trips are a trip that was just posted today, a mountain biking trip from Pajarito Mountain to Valle Caldera, and it's a shuttle. So yeah, you can contact Sylvie if you're interested in participating. Bill has another llama supported trip in October, which is full at this time. And there's also the Moab trip in November, which has a waiting list. And we also have our ongoing Pajarito hikes. They're every Monday at 5:30 p.m. and you can contact Bill if you're interested in joining. So that's it for me. Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Tony. Sorry, she's going to introduce our speaker for tonight.
Yes, so I'm actually substituting for Rod McCabe, who organizes the speakers. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Kristen Honig, who will be talking about Iceland and her journeys through ice, fire, and ice. So Kristen has been pursuing her passion of photography for more than 20 years, focusing on the natural beauty of the world around her. Her work includes landscapes and wildlife images from many national parks and monuments, as well as iconic photos of the nation's wildfires. And in fact, in the summer of 2002, she worked as a wildland firefighter for the National Park Service. Recently, she's traveled both to the Arctic and Antarctic regions, where she's witnessed firsthand the unbridled nature and pristine landscapes of some of the most remote locations on Earth. So welcome, Kristen. We look forward to your talk.
Thank you all thank you for that introduction, Tony, and thank you all for inviting me to come talk about my trips to Iceland. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction. Tony gave a great start to that. I actually grew up here in Los Alamos, and I got interested in photography when I was in high school. So my senior year, I was a photographer for the yearbook staff. A few years later, I ended up receiving a contract with the National Interagency Fire Center to photograph wildfires across the West. And then as I've become more of a world traveler, I've really picked up photographing throughout the world, I'm particularly drawn to nature and landscapes and wildlife. And as Tony mentioned, I recently had the opportunity to travel to the Arctic and Antarctic regions, which was just such a unique and privilege. I was absolutely drawn to the remote nature and the fact that it's such delicate ecosystems. And I really, really loved the icebergs. I was just absolutely thought there was so much beauty in the ice. And so probably around that same time, I think is when one of the software companies had a new wallpaper that came out on all the computers. And it was this amazing, beautiful photo of an ice cave. And I was just completely drawn to that and decided that that was going to be my next trip. So that ice cave was in Iceland. And anybody that's on this call who's a photographer can probably relate to the fact that traveling with a photographer can be a little annoying to our travel mates, because we love to take a ton of pictures and aren't ready to move on when everyone else is. So I decided that traveling to Iceland, I wanted to go by myself so I could stay as long as I wanted to take as many pictures as I wanted. And so Iceland is a fantastic place for single female travelers. I felt safe the whole time. It's very easy to navigate. The roads are very similar to, same side of the road as we drive in the US. So it was just a perfect trip. I planned my entire itinerary based off of some travel blogs I saw online, and then tailored it to my personal interests. So, and the last reason why Iceland, well, why not? I'm a big advocate of seizing the opportunities when you have them in front of you, because you just never know when you won't have that chance again. So a brief introduction to those of you who aren't familiar with Iceland. It's often referred to as the land of fire and ice. There are 269 named glaciers, including Vatnajökull, which is Europe's largest ice cap. About 11% of the land is covered in ice. And it's also interesting because it's located along the mid-Atlantic ridge. So the North American and Eurasian plates are actually pulling the country apart. And there's a lake along this titanic rift where you can actually go and snorkel and scuba dive in between the tectonic plates. I will tell you it's very cold. Even if you're in a dry suit, my hands were in a wetsuit, and 30 minutes in that water is very cold, but it is a completely unique experience. There are also 130 volcanoes because of this tectonic activity, and about 30 of those are considered still active systems. Of those 30, 13 have erupted during the settlement of Iceland, and many of those 13 have erupted multiple times during that time period. And collectively, over the last 500 years, Iceland has contributed to 1/3 of the total global lava output. So here's a map of Iceland just to give you some perspective on where the major glacial systems are. For my talk today, I'm going to focus on primarily an ice cave that I visited in the Vatnajökull ice sheet. So it's this area right here, if you can see my mouse. I also have one photo comparison series down near the community of Vik. So focusing on Vatnajökull, the glacier covers an area of about 3,200 square miles and has an average ice thickness of more than 3,000 feet. Its name actually translates into glacier of lakes, mostly because of having these numerous subglacial volcanoes that actually melt the ice from below. There are 30 outlet glaciers, including one that I am not even going to attempt to pronounce, but that is actually the glacier that I will be talking about today in my talk, where we actually went to go see the ice cave. And what's interesting about that particular glacier is it is above one of the most active volcanoes in Iceland, Grímsvötn. And when the volcano erupts, it creates these massive mudslides that cover take out the road, killed people in earlier times. So it's a very dangerous volcano and very feared. And so talking more about these ice caves. So basically they form in the summer months when the water, they start melting on the edges and the water kind of starts melting on the underside. And so the caves are beautiful during the summer months, but they're all too unstable to visit. So the typical glacier caving season in Iceland is from November until March, when the caves are stable enough to be in them. And one of the things that really drew me to these caves, and also is kind of a theme within this presentation, is that these are areas that are constantly changing. And that's what makes this experience so unique, is that even if you came to an ice cave at the beginning of the season, what you're going to see at the end of the season is not even the same cave. So each person's experience is really unique as the ice is melting, or there's flooding in the caves. So each trip is very unique. One of the things about these caves is, again, after it was published on one of the computer's wallpapers, it became incredibly popular for tourists. And 10 years ago, you could go into some of these caves when they were first discovered, and a tour would consist of 8 to 10 people, and you would have the cave to yourself. When I went in 2020, the major cave systems that were the most accessible could have several hundred people in a small cave, which obviously is not super attractive to a photographer. So I looked around and I found a company that was offering flights out to more remote locations higher up on the glacier, where they were inaccessible to anything but helicopter. And so you had a much more small group setting. So as you can see here in this map, we flew in helicopter from the Skaftafell Airport, and this was about the approximate location of where the ice caves were. Another important thing is, when you're going to ice caves, it's absolutely critical that you bring a guide. They are familiar with the area. They understand the dangers and the hazards of the caves. They can read, really read the ice and tell what areas are not so stable. And so the company that I went with was called From Coast to Mountains. The owner here is in the picture off to the right. His name is Einar, and he was both our guide and our owner. And I call him the legend, because really anybody on the southern coast of Iceland, when you mention his name, they know exactly who he is. His family actually were original settlers of Iceland, and he still lives on that family farm today. His great-grandfather was the first person to climb Iceland's highest peak, and Einar himself actually holds the world record for summiting that peak 309 times to date. He also has the longest running mountain guiding business in the country, And especially for this audience, you might be interested to know that it's not just ice caves that he takes people out to, but it is also, he does a lot of ice climbing trips where you can go climb frozen waterfalls. He does a lot of ski mountaineering trips, overnight trips. So I would highly recommend him. For the ice cave trip, it was more expensive than some of the other companies, although a lot of that was because of the helicopter trip. So I think I personally felt like the quality you got with this company was worth any slight additional cost. So as I mentioned, to get to this ice cave, we took a helicopter. This trip was shared by 3 other photographers and myself, as well as our guide. And the trip was advertised as being about 2.5 to 3 hours on the ice. But we were super lucky and ended up having more than 5 hours on the ice. There were a network of caves. We got to go into 7 of them. 2 weeks before that, these caves were flooded and you could only access a few of the ones on the outer edges. So again, very fortunate on our timing. Some of the gear that we brought along, first of all, hard hat and headlamp. That was super important because within the ice, there's a lot of rocks that are frozen in the ice. And as the ice melts, these rocks are falling from the ceiling. And they do, there's some really large ones, but obviously those were areas that we avoided, but still very important to have that protection. Also crampons, that was very important, gave great traction on the ice. And then I think Einar had an ice axe just sort of like as an emergency type use, but that wasn't really essential for our trip. Okay, so here's a few photos from the flight over to the glacier. As you can see, there were some really beautiful sections of blue ice, but a lot of it was a bit overcast. And because this is a very volcanically active area, a lot of the views were very black and white. We also kind of all got a kick out of the fact that we were the paying tourists and our guide is the one that had the front seat in the helicopter, but I guess we couldn't all 4 fit in the front seat. So my next slide is going to be a video of that flight out. So as you can see, very, very black and white. I'm hoping this is translating. I know we had a little bit of problems with some videos being a little jumpy, but I hope you can get the basic gist of it. So again, we didn't have to fly. The flight was pretty short. I think we all would have loved a little more flight seeing time, but it was great to get to such a remote location. Okay, so here's some photos for when we first arrived. The photo on the top, I love this photo because it really illustrates how the cave is really at the very edge of bleeding the ice on the glacier. So you can see one of the photographers standing near the edge, and that's kind of one of the areas that we first went into in the complex of ice caves. The photo off onto the bottom left is what's known as a moulin. And these are basically circular shafts that are created in the ice as the ice starts to melt, and it kind of just drills down into this hole into the ice. Why that's important with this trip is because you know, when you go into these ice caves, when you're near the openings, that's where the light's penetrating the ice. It's where it's thin enough. But we actually explored deep enough back into some of these caves that it was completely pitch black. And we would have to climb over things and pass the camera through some of the nooks and crannies and then slither through. And, you know, it's pitch black. Of course, we had headlamps, but it seemed like every time we get to a point where you needed a light, all of a sudden there would be this light. And none of these photos you're going to see today were taken with any artificial light. But these natural skylights would happen at these quite timely locations where you would get this breach of natural daylight penetrating through thick layers of ice. So I'll point that out on one of the photos coming up. So this is the very first ice cave that we went into, and this is kind of the opening, the largest of the caves, and there were several interconnected chambers. The photo that was on the cover of this presentation that was taken in here as well. This is a photo in an adjacent cave that wasn't exactly connected, but all in the same location. These pictures I grouped together because they provide sort of the texture of the ice. So the photo off to the left, what I think is interesting about that, whoever discovers the cave gets to name it. So Einar discovered this cave and named it the Blue Dragon Ice Cave. And again, as I said, 2 weeks before I tripped, they had this waterfall, this underground river that was flowing, and this whole cave was pretty much flooded. By the time we got there, the water had receded, but it left these little plates of ice that, with the blue light that reflected off of it, it really looked a lot like scales on a dragon. So I thought that was very interesting. Obviously, icicles on the top, and then the image on the bottom is actually an air bubble within the ice. There were a lot of different abstract images. It was really fun macro photography. Yeah, lots of strange items that were stuck within the ice. You can see right here too, if you can see my cursor, that's bits of ash. And that's one of the things that separates the ice caves in Iceland from some of the other locations in the world, is that there's a lot of ash mixed in with this ice. In fact, in Katla, which I will show at the very end, they actually have just bands of black, and some of the ice is just total black from the ash. And this is a video, again, I hope that you can kind of see, it's not too pixelated, but this is just, I'm moving my camera so you can get a little bit of a perspective of all of the sediment and rock and ash that's trapped within some of these ice caves. Okay, this next one is a photo. So I mentioned moulins are these vertical shafts. Well, they don't always have to be vertical. It makes more sense because gravity is pulling it into this vertical shaft. But this is one that was more carved out by one of the glacial rivers, and it's sort of this subway kind of tunnel that was really fun to go back into. These set of pictures are more just, again, close-ups or abstract images. The photo in the bottom left I thought was very interesting. This was almost like a little skylight in one of the caves. I assume that that's sediment, not rock, but that's staring up into the ceiling. And this is my favorite photo from the trip. This is Einar. Again, I had mentioned that occasionally we got these skylights. So this is one of those examples. As you can see, the cave is very dark to the right and to the left. But there's this skylight that's just created this perfect opening in the cave. And Einar went over there and posed for us for probably 5 minutes. In this kind of a photo, you're taking a longer exposure. So your exposures are anywhere from like 3 to 5 seconds. So he had to stand incredibly still for quite a while for us to all get our photos of him. And this photo is actually how the cave got its namesake. So if you can see my cursor, this is an ice bridge. So we actually walked underneath this to get out of the cave. Obviously, it's open at the top. And this is why Einar named it the Blue Dragon Ice Cave, because to him, this looked like the tail of a dragon. And then we all also took turns taking our own selfies, where we would set our camera on a timer and you know, run out there. We were all very careful to step on each other's footprints so we didn't disrupt the scene too much. But we all took turns taking our own self-portraits. And this is a video. I hope that you can hear the sound. This is again that first ice cave, where it gives you a little perspective on the scale and the size of the ice chamber that we came down into. And you can also hear that it sounds like you're walking on glass. Off to the left is where we were headed, and that's where it was completely pitch black and where we had to pass our cameras through some of the gaps. Okay, And then just to wrap up the ice caving trip. So again, my objective was to see as many ice caves as I could when I was there. So I went to 3 different caves. Definitely none of them were the experience like the one where it was just the 3 of us. The other caves were very crowded. But this picture I took at Katla, and you can see a lot of the black ash that's interwoven within the ice. And so this was taken in February 2020. Now I'm going to show you a photo of the same cave just about 14 months later. I know obviously the colors are different, slightly different angle, but I want to draw your attention to this skylight here is the same as this skylight back here. So the majority of this barrel part of the arch has completely melted away only 1 year later. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the fire part of Iceland and talk about their volcanoes. So as I mentioned before, they're located along the mid-Atlantic rift system, but they're also located, the country is also located above a hotspot. And so it actually has some different types of basaltic lava depending on the location within the country. This image or this map shows some of the major volcanoes. Again, I mentioned there are quite a few. So these are some of the ones you may hear in the news. The color coding is, this is an aviation color coding system. So, so green obviously is good, non-eruptive state. Yellow indicates that it's elevated unrest. So Grimsvötn has shown elevated earthquake activity in the last 2 or 3 months, and that has recently changed to yellow. The area I'm going to focus on today is down here in the Reykjanes Peninsula, and talk about the Gelding volcano. The reason it is only orange instead of red is because, again, this is an aviation system or coding. And so even though it's erupting primarily just a very effusive lava flow and very, very little ash. And in fact, when I flew over there, Iceland Air actually detoured, because the airport is right over here on the tip of the Reykjanes Peninsula. They actually detoured and flew us out to the volcano so that both sides of the airplane could see it and then landed. So obviously not disrupting air traffic. So red is when it's emitting ash, that would be a red alert, and then the aircraft would be grounded. Okay, so talking about traveling internationally during COVID, you know, I became interested in, I started hearing talk about in the news about these earthquakes, and that got me interested, and it was obviously leading up to an eruption. And since I had just been there, I was probably a little bit more interested in that news than if I had never been to Iceland. Right around the time that the volcano started, Iceland had announced that they would start accepting vaccinated travelers without requiring quarantine. At the time, you did have to take a single COVID test at the airport, which you didn't have to pay for, it was free. But that requirement has actually gone away as of July 1st. One thing that has not gone away though is pre-registration. So anybody on this talk that's interested in going to Iceland, you do need to pre-register. It's basically used for contact tracing and that sort of thing. And when I pre-registered, they gave me a barcode, which is what they used to inform me of my test results at the airport. They're also, in order to come back to the US, you have to also get a COVID test, the current policy. And so I know it's a very small country, but man, were they organized. They had testing centers throughout the country established. All of the registration was online. You would register, you would pay, they'd send you this barcode. And I was able to get in and out in 5 minutes for my COVID test. And then within 6 hours, I received my results as a text message on my phone, and something that I could share with the airline for verification. Another thing in my particular situation is that I knew I had to quarantine until I got those test results, and my flight came in at 6 in the morning. So I actually booked a hotel room for the night before I arrived, so I had a place to stay. They reached out to me and asked if I was going to be quarantining, and when I told them I would be, they said they would bring me my complimentary breakfast to the door. And I just had to take this picture because I just was so amazed that this was their complimentary quarantine breakfast. It was absolutely wonderful. A few more things. Obviously, traveling, travel insurance is a good thing to do. But I was very impressed with the flexibility that many of the hotels, and particularly Iceland Airlines, offered. So at the time I booked, and I believe it's still the case now, if you canceled your trip because pretty much for any reason, they would issue you a credit that you could use within the next 3 years. And I thought that was a very generous time frame to be able to rebook a flight. Okay, so getting there. When I went to Iceland the first time, I did rent an SUV in order to have, 4-wheel drive for the snowy conditions. But I thought I could save a little money and get a smaller car for this trip. And when I arrived at the airport and I told the guy behind the counter where I was going, he immediately upgraded me and told me I would never get out of the parking lot. And he was right. The parking lot was very rudimentary. It was basically somebody's field. Well, for one thing, the volcano was actually erupting on private land. And so that landowner had basically put a bulldozer in and dozed out a section for people to park. But, they were receiving thousands, several thousand, up to 6,000 people in a single day. So they were obviously running out of space, and a lot of the parking was a little bit sketchy, to say the least. They also had a few toilets there at the start of the trail. And the trail was very well established and well marked. And it was actually even improved while I was there. So there was one section of trail that was really pretty. It was a steep scree. And by the time I came back 3 days later, it was this nice, gentle, rolling. I mean, it's still uphill, but it was very groomed. It was really nice. And they have had talk about plans for more permanent infrastructure. They do believe there's a strong likelihood the volcano will continue to erupt. So there are plans for making this a more permanent geopark. Even if it stops erupting, it could be more like Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, where people can very easily access some fresh lava. The trail system started out with a single trail. And as the volcano has grown, so has the trail system. One of the trails has since completely been closed, and that was the trail that I took. Certainly the most popular one. It was the one that got you the closest, but it has since been covered by lava. They also have a volunteer search and rescue crew that, to my knowledge, has been servicing the site since the eruption. So for over 4 months, they've been rotating in and having people on site from noon to midnight, which is just phenomenal. They've been assisting visitors in some of the steeper areas, but most importantly, they have gas monitors. And so that was really important because some days the sulfur dioxide was too high for certain trails to be accessed. And sometimes I would change during the day. So that gave me a lot of confidence that if that trail was open, that it was safe to be there. I also found it a little bit difficult to find information on the volcano at first. I mean, there's a lot of information on like the news sites and, about the activity, but, I really didn't know where the parking lot was. I figured I could figure it out once I got there. I couldn't find maps. And then I finally stumbled across this website called safetravel.is. And I would recommend this to anybody going to Iceland. It's not just, there's a link on it for the volcano, but it also has lots of great tips, driving tips. It'll tell you if certain roads have been washed out. And you can even file a plan, like a safe travel plan there. So they'll track you, particularly in the winter, and make sure that you reached your destinations. For the link that pertained to the volcano, though, what was wonderful to me was that it had a ton of data. And so since this volcano is really accessible, it is very monitored. And the scientists, of course, are super excited about that. And it makes it a great opportunity for tourists to see the eruption as well. So at this website, they've actually, well, at the site, they've deployed numerous remote automated weather stations, or RAWs. So you're getting like live weather updates. They have gas dispersion models, so you can tell whether you can take a path. And then they have trail maps that have the lava progression on them, and you can download these to your phone or to your GPS device. So lots of great data there. In terms of packing, the two things that I think were most important was, for one thing, weather appropriate gear. So when I was there, it was already becoming to the point where it wasn't 24 hours, like you never got fully dark, but I was still very surprised because it's so far north. But I was very surprised that how dark it still did get. And so my headlamp did not have the strongest lights, and the batteries I should have checked before I left. So I didn't have a great beam of light. That was very important. Also, it got really cold when it got dark, or as dark as it was going to get. So it definitely dipped below freezing. And I'd say both nights I was out there, the fingers that I had outside the gloves were completely frozen. Like I couldn't, I was out there for 6 hours, but I couldn't feel the tips of my fingers. So even though I packed well, that is very critical. And now, as you're moving in, into summer, obviously not so cold, but it is very rainy. So waterproof gear is very important. Okay, so some background. I don't recall if I mentioned this before, but when I went to Iceland the first time, even before I left, there was talk about these earthquake storms. And I even remember thinking like, oh, that's pretty close to the Blue Lagoon. I wonder if that'll cancel my trip to the Blue Lagoon. So obviously it did not. And these earthquakes persisted for well over a year. And then in basically early March, they started increasing in frequency. And so they had about 40,000 tremors that occurred in the first 3 weeks of March, including some big ones, like they had one that had a 5.7 magnitude. And then by March 19th, at about 9-10 o'clock at night, the lava breached the surface and started erupting. And so the Coast Guard was the first to fly out there and actually get some video of the eruption. That persisted for maybe about 2 weeks. And then in early April, more and more of these vents started opening up. And at one point, a total of 10 vents were opened, and they're all in this linear fashion, like you can see in this photograph, sort of like the Earth's crust just sort of unzipped itself. But only a few days before I got out there, vent number 5, which is this little guy here, was the only one still active. So this photograph is taken on April 14th. The next photograph was taken on May 20th. So this was a little bit after my trip. But you can see that basically all of the magma got focused into one vent, and that vent, grew massively. And basically, especially if you look at system number 1, this is the first one that opened, you can see it's almost covered by the lava on vent number 5. Go back one more time. Okay. So needless to say, this has been a tourist savior for the country. They have had more than 180,000 visitors to the volcano site since for over a 4-month period. Earlier in the eruption, they actually had, and they've been, their tourism industry has been tracking these. And so they actually had more than 6,000 people appear in a single day. And they estimate that more than 30% of the Icelandic population has been to the site at least once. As I mentioned, it's been continuously erupting for 4 months, but its eruption style has changed a lot. So, initially it was a single vent, it was a continuous flow, but it was very it was just kind of overflowing the cauldron. Then all these vents in a row open up. And then when it all concentrated into a single vent, it became a pulsating fire geyser. So picture Yellowstone, but instead of boiling water, it's spewing lava. And it was just incredible. And it was predictable. I mean, it was while I was out there, it was probably erupting every 10 to 15 minutes, and it would erupt for about 5 minutes, and then it would cycle back through. In the more recent months, it's done a lot of flow, not as much surface flows, but more flowing through lava tubes below the surface. In the middle of July, there was actually a hole at the base of the crater. So lava was kind of pouring out of that, almost like pulling the drain out of the bathtub. But it has been continuously flowing. I just looked at it before I started this presentation this evening, and it is still active. But because of the weather, it's been very, very foggy the last 5 weeks or so. They call it VOG, volcanic fog. And so sometimes they don't have a good idea on the perimeter, but every time they get a clearing, they're still able to see fresh lava. As I mentioned before, they have a pretty established trail system. Trail A was the preferred trail because it got you as close as that photo over onto the right that I took while I was there. That trail got closed in June when it was overflowed by lava in several spots. And now Trail C has been established as the lava has flown a lot closer to the coastal road. So they have tried several times to corral and redirect the lava flow. They installed two earthen walls to try to keep the lava out of the Natai Valley. But neither one of those worked. They have buried communication lines in that valley, so they were hoping to be able to keep the lava out. That was not successful, but they have established a second wall at the end of the Natai Valley to keep the lava from flowing out onto Road 427, which is that coastal road. And right now, that's been successful. So I'm going to show you kind of a quick animation of how the volcano and the lava's perimeter changed from when it started till when I first came out. So again, for the first month, just this double vent filling up the Gelding Valley. And then another one opened up in early April, and then slowly more vents opened up all in this linear fashion, filling into the Meridal Valley and headed towards the Natai Valley. And so May 3rd is as close as I could find a map of as close to when I got there. My first night out on the volcano was May 5th, but as you can see by May 3rd, all the activities concentrated along vent number 5. So I was very fortunate. Both days I went out to the volcano. Again, depending on the direction of the wind and the wind speed, could sometimes shut down trails. And Trail A was the best trail, but a lot of times you weren't able to take that one. So I was very lucky. I was able to take that trail both times. There's a couple steep sections in that trail to get up to basically the saddle where you get your first view of the volcano. So this is hiking Trail A. You can see they did a great job in putting in some base course, and the trail starts out nice and gentle. Couple of steep spots. I know that doesn't look steep, but I promise you they were a little bit steep. This is a scree section that was really not bad going up, but very slippery going down, especially in the dark with not a great headlamp. The trail itself was about 4 miles one way and an elevation climb of about 1,100 feet. And the dirt there was super fine orangey powder. And I don't know, it really shows in this photo of my shoes, but man, they were absolutely filthy by the time I got back. Okay, so when you reach the saddle and you've never seen the volcano yet for the first time, this is essentially what it looks like. This is a little bit zoomed in, but this is pretty close to the view you had at the saddle. So the saddle is about a mile from the vent. Here's a shot of it actually starting to do the geyser eruption. And so I had such a great time there. I was so mesmerized that I probably stayed an hour. And I was chatting with the geologist. From Norway, who said he'd been waiting his whole life to be able to see this. So it was very cool. Everybody, there were mostly locals, but there were some tourists that had come, and many of them, this was sort of the pinnacle of their career to be able to witness this. So I finally said, okay, I've taken enough pictures. The guy at the airport that upgraded my car told me that the best viewing point was turning right from that viewpoint. So I did follow that up to get to viewpoint number 2. And this is what the trail looked like. Again, very, very easygoing, a little bit of side slope, and then a bit of a gentle hill. But when you get to the top, you're actually only a quarter mile away from the volcano. So these are some search and rescue people arriving on the scene, on site. People taking selfies, of course. And then one thing, if anybody's been monitoring this on the news, you've probably seen a million different videos taken from drones. So there were many of those on site. Some people even flew the drone into the volcano until it melted. But not while I was there, but I've seen those on the internet. So anyway, I can't even describe to you what it was like, but you know, everybody, the majority of people would come later in the evening. They would bring a snack, and basically they would have a picnic. And this is what we saw on the hillside. And it was, you know, people would talk a little bit, but for the most part, it was just like a hushed reverence. I mean, it was absolutely so amazing. It was really the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. And, you know, and it would just do this predictably, you know, it was like watching fireworks on the hillside, having your picnic. And so anyway, that was one of the photos of my first night. The way it would typically erupt is that you'd have the caldera, and when you could tell it was getting ready to start cycling, it would start overflowing on this side. Here's a photo of some of the lava flows themselves. And then it would start boiling up, you know, kind of again like a geyser, and then it would just start spraying lava, these chunks of lava everywhere. And as I mentioned before, the wind speed was very important, because not only was it the gases, but when it was spraying these chunks of lava, depending on the wind speed, it could actually carry these significant distances. And so the hillside that I was at, fortunately, we had pretty low winds, but on higher windy days, that was actually within one of their boundary circles. And so that would have been, you know, roped off of not being safe that day to be that close. Also, we were obviously extremely close, because the whole hillside that we were sitting at was littered with these pieces of volcanic tephra. The best way I can describe it is sort of like a piece of ash, but then it has sort of like a hard, sort of very thin, very delicate, glassy coating to it. So they were, you know, super lightweight. They crumbled very easily. But that gives you a size of the scale, that some of these were like golf ball size, and the whole hillside was just scattered with these. Here's a video I shot with my iPhone to give you some perspective. Obviously, there was some wind noise, but really there's quite a roar when it gets going. The second night, I had booked a helicopter flight. In hindsight, I probably didn't need to, because I had no idea I'd be within a quarter of a mile of the volcano just on the hillside. But I wanted to make sure I got to see, you know, a good aerial view. Anybody that's traveling to Iceland, just a little tip. Most of the tourist flights fly out of the Reykjavik airport. not the Keflavik airport. I didn't know there were two of them, and I actually almost missed my helicopter flight. So anyway, fortunately, I was at the end of the day and they did wait for me. But yeah, I didn't know there were two airports in the community. So here's my first, when we first arrive on scene, and as you can see, again, these volcanic vents are very much in alignment in this line. This is vent number 2, which was the largest vent until it just all of a sudden one day stopped erupting, and all of the activity concentrated on vent number 5. So I'll go through just a few photos I took from the air. I knew we would not fly over the crater itself, of course, but I was kind of hoping to fly over some of the actual lava rivers. And my pilot told me that there's so much heat coming off of this area, right? Where the lava is flowing in these rivers, that it actually makes the helicopter climb several hundred feet. So anyway, obviously we did not get to fly over that, but it was great time and great views. Okay, so then I did a couple other things while I was there. I did go to another ice cave where I got to take that picture. That was 14 months later. I went to a really cool waterfall as well. And then my last day that I was there on the trip, I came back and hiked back out to the volcano. And so this time the lava had actually advanced within the Gelding Valley. And so I could actually hike down to it and be right up against it. So here's a couple photos. You can see obviously there were other people down in the valley as well. I'll tell you, it was incredibly hot. Obviously I'd been up against pretty hot flames in a forest fire, but this was very surprising. The next video I'm about to show you, I took with my iPhone and literally was maybe 2 feet away, and I could only take about 4 seconds before my hand, I just couldn't take it anymore. As you can see, it's very, very slow going. And a lot of times it didn't even look like it was moving, but I did take some photos on a tripod where I was trying to get a picture with the foreground and then the volcano erupting in the background. And when I scrolled through them later, you could actually see that the lava in the foreground was moving ever so slowly, but over the course of 20 or 30 minutes, you could actually see it almost as like a time lapse. Also, something I'm not sure you could actually tell in the video sound, but when the main volcano erupted, it sounded very much like crashing waves or a coffee pot as it comes to a boil. The lava in the valley, as it was just slowly crawling along, sounded like broken glass. It's very interesting. All right, so after spending way too much time in the valley, and I will say this, it was like sleeting and snowing on me when I was first hiking out, and it was only like 5 minutes in the valley that I had been completely warmed up, dried off. Yeah, just an amazing amount of heat. So then I went back to the same spot I was at the day, my first time out. And on this trip, I decided to focus on some longer exposure photographs, which actually was kind of tricky because there was so much lava that was erupting that it was so bright that I actually had to wait until the very end of the eruption as it was starting to settle down and try to take some longer exposure shots there, because otherwise it was just this big bright light pretty much. So on the photo off to the left, that's kind of what I was doing there. On the photo to the right here, you can see the caldera is in focus, but the lava river, if you will, you can see that it's blurred as the motion of the lava is a longer exposure. And then this next photo is my favorite one from the whole trip. So this is really, again, to me, what the whole experience was like. I mean, just to be sitting there, in the dark, surrounded by all these people that are all there for the same thing, just enjoying this experience that you know, you never would have thought you'd have the chance to see. It was just incredible and peaceful, and yeah, I don't really have words to describe it, but it was absolutely amazing experience. So just to wrap up, I have a quick animation to show you how things have changed since I was out there. As you can see, the lava, the trail has since disappeared. The two spots where I stopped to take photographs are now under lava, and lava has advanced very close to the road. So unfortunately, I cut that off in this picture, but the road is just a little, it dips a little bit more, but it's just barely off the screen here. But as, again, this last lava perimeter that I have is the end of June. I've not been able to get any updates since then, I think primarily because of the fog, so they really don't know what the perimeter is. But it has not advanced beyond, this is where the one retaining wall is located, and has not advanced beyond that at this point, to my knowledge. It's mostly spreading out in the Maridal Valley at this direction. So just to wrap it up, the Gelding volcano, it's the first eruption within the Reykjanes Peninsula in the last 800 years. And in the particular Fagradalsfjall volcanic system, it's actually been 6,000 years. So I know geologically that's new, but in a country like Iceland where it's so active, that's actually quite a while for an eruption. The eruption type is an effusive lava flow with very little ash. So again, that's why it's not impacting air travel. And aside from the early eruption where it was relatively small, the discharge rate has been somewhat relatively constant. So maximum rate of about 15 cubic meters per second. And as of through the end of June, so I'm sure this is larger now, they estimated the lava volume to be about 80 million cubic meters, which makes it one of the largest eruptions on the Reykjanes Peninsula. So again, started out as this almost baby volcano. It was getting all kinds of cute nicknames on the internet about being a cute science fair volcano project. But it has obviously grown as it continues to erupt over the last 4 months. The crater height in early June was about 100 meters. I don't think that has changed a lot, because what's happening is since it's no longer doing this fire geyser where it's spewing lava and building height, it's more like the volcano, like the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii, where it's more developing into a shield volcano, where the lava is slowly overflowing the caldera and creating these broad lava plains. They also, I think I mentioned before, this is also a very heavily monitored volcano because they were able to get there right when it first started. So they have weather stations out there, but they also have a ton of live view cameras out there. And so they've been able to use the footage from the live view cameras to measure the lava fountains. And they've been able to determine that some of the lava fountains have been as high as 460 meters, so basically 1,500 feet high, which is the equivalent to the Willis Tower, or the Sears Tower, as some may know it by, in Chicago. So very, very high lava fountains. And then also what's very interesting is, again, it's really drawing a lot of scientists because it has, it's so accessible and they're getting to be there from the very beginning. And so some of the scientists have been out there taking samples of the lava. And what they're finding is that the longer the eruption continues, the more primitive the lava is. So they're based off on the chemical composition, they can tell that it's coming deeper within the Earth's mantle. So they estimate it's about 20 kilometers deep is the magma source, which means it's in the mantle, not in the crust. And why that's important is that instead of the mantle feeding some sort of a reservoir within the crust, that would limit the magma and lava supply. So at some point, you know, the eruption would run out of lava. But because it's being fed by the mantle, in theory, it has an infinite supply of magma. And so obviously nobody knows how long it's going to last. Kilauea, has erupted almost continuously for about 40 years. So we'll see if this one turns out being similar. But if it does, it will be very much like the Kilauea volcano, or it would create a shield volcano. And so that's what I have for you today. If you enjoyed these photos, I do have a solo exhibit at the Fuller Lodge Art Center that I will be hanging up this Friday, and it will run through the whole month of August and September. So if you're interested, just take a peek. And also, this is my website if you want to look at some more photos from this trip or from other trips. And with that, I will take questions.
So we did get a few questions that I'm going to start off with, and then, like I said, folks can type them into the chat and I'll try to get through all of them.
Great.
So the first questions that we have are about Iceland. So someone asked, did the outfitter loan you your gear that you brought into the cave, or did you bring your own gear with you?
Excellent question. Yes, that was loaned to us. I have bought some microspikes since then, because trying to get around Iceland in winter, even if you're not in an ice cave, it's good to have microspikes actually needed in the parking lot half of the places I stayed. So that would be my advice. But yes, the outfitter lent us all the gear that was necessary.
Awesome. And then someone asked, from what country did Einar's family leave to move to Iceland, if you know?
Oh, I don't know. Now I'm gonna have to go look that up. I'm guessing Norway, I believe, but I don't know that for a fact. Good question.
Okay. Someone asked how much of the cave was semi-transparent ice as opposed to compacted snow.
Sure. So I was amazed at how deep we could go, and it was still, well, it was all compacted ice. It was just the deeper you got in and the thicker the ice was, obviously light couldn't penetrate it. But yeah, in this part, it was all very, very compacted, where there were very little air bubbles, or it was like those abstract air bubbles that I had the photo of. So it was very light, was able to travel through it very, very well.
And then someone asked, how long were you in Iceland for both trips?
Sure. So both trips were about the same length, actually. The first trip was 9 days. So basically my 2 weekends plus the week in between. And then the second trip was a little shorter. I flew in on Wednesday. Well, no, about the same. I flew in on Wednesday and I flew back on Tuesday. So, yeah, so about a week on that one.
Okay, cool. Did you do anything in I can't remember how you pronounce the capital, Reykjavik?
Yeah.
Yeah, did you do anything in the city, or were you purely there for your adventures?
Yeah, not very much. So when I was flying back from Svalbard, we flew Icelandair, and we actually missed our connecting flight in Reykjavik. So we got to spend the night there. So our flight didn't leave until 5 o'clock the next day. So I got to explore Reykjavik before this trip, and I felt like I had seen enough of the city part. So it was more focused on photography. There are definitely some more cultural things that I would love to go back to and see those as a separate trip that would be more focused on the culture and the people. This was more these natural phenomenons that I wanted to capture photographically. So that was really, really how I tailored my itinerary.
Great. Let's see, we've got about 2 more questions that have come in, but if you haven't asked yours yet and you have some burning questions, go ahead and type those in the chat. I just want to make sure people get them answered if they have them. So someone asked, while you were there seeing the volcanoes, was the sky ever dark enough to see the northern lights?
Oh, very good question. So yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have gotten there sooner. I was very limited by my vaccine. So I didn't even have a vaccine when they first announced this. Unfortunately, I was able to get both shots within the next 3-week time period. But I was monitoring websites that were talking about, how much daylight, how much dark sky you'd have. And according to the website, I expected it to be much lighter in the middle of the night, because it was not only not regular, there was not supposed to be any complete darkness and not even astronomical darkness, I think is the term. So it really, I expected it to be nowhere near dark enough to see the Northern Lights. It was definitely dark enough to see. It didn't happen when I was there, unfortunately, because I've seen some phenomenal photos where people have, you know, the steam from the volcano that's orange, and then you've got the Northern Lights above it, and just some phenomenal photos. But unfortunately, not while I was there.
Maybe another trip.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So then Amy asked, did you encounter any wildlife while you were there?
No, well, not the second time. The first time I did, actually, I was driving to the Glacier Lagoon to catch an early morning, one of my trips out. No, I was trying to catch the sunrise. That's what it was. I was going to Diamond Beach to catch the sunrise and try to, you know, take some of those photos where the big icebergs are on the black sand and you can blur the water as it's coming in. And so I wanted to catch a sunrise, and it totally shocked me that there was like 2 or 3 reindeer on the side of the road, like just having breakfast. So that was surprising, but that was it, actually. That's the only thing I can remember on either trip. Okay. And birds, of course. I mean, there were a lot of birds, a lot of different. I did not ever see puffins. I get season for that. There were a lot of birds in the fields, but that's it.
Okay. So let's see. Someone said, tell us about your photography equipment.
Oh, okay. So I shoot Canon. I do digital. So I kind of got into doing, like, buying my own gear right around the time that everything was transitioning from film to digital. So I shoot Canon. I, over the course of 20 years, have kind of built up my inventory. So on this trip, I have my typical, what I usually take on trips is a 1-400 for wildlife. In the ice caves, I had a 17-55 to get, you know, really wide angle. I even had a 10-20. So again, the wider you can in the ice caves, but my 17-55 was an f2.8 lens, so it could absorb more light. So that kind of made that the preferred lens for the ice caves. And then for the volcanoes, I actually, I rented a camera. Well, I brought my own, but I also rented a camera because you know, just like film went by the way of digital, I hear digital is going by the way of mirrorless. And so I rented a camera system to try to test out the whole mirrorless system. And so far I liked it. It was certainly lighter weight. I'm not ready to sell all my gear yet, but I did like it.
Okay. Did you exclusively use that mirrorless for like all the photos you shared? Or
no, I brought one of each. Yeah, I never travel without 2 cameras. Because especially, you know, I mean, I guess it depends where you're going, but if it's a place you don't think you're going to get back to, I always bring an extra backup. And when I went to Antarctica and Svalbard, I actually brought 3 because I was afraid that, so I have 1 camera for a wide angle and 1 camera for a telephoto. And you don't really want to be changing lenses in a lot of those environments. So I just have like 1 slung over each shoulder. And so my fear was that I was going to have it in a dry bag and the dry bag wouldn't work and the Zodiac would dump over and I'd lose all my camera gear in one flip. So considering Antarctica in particular is such a, you know, once in a lifetime thing, I overpacked for that, but it was worth it to just have that peace of mind.
Okay, got it. So this last question I have, again, if someone has one more, go ahead and sneak that in. But volcanoes or ice caves, which one would it?
That's tough because honestly, they were probably 2 of my favorite things I've ever seen. But I would have to say the volcano. I mean, I even told my friends, I think it topped the penguins, which is hard to say because the penguins are pretty amazing. But yeah, the volcano. And I'm not sure, unfortunately for this audience, you know, you can't replicate my experience anymore. I mean, the closest you can do is a helicopter. So, you know, it wouldn't be the same, but to be able to be, you know, a quarter of a mile away, everybody's there with the same focus, the same intent, just experiencing this once in a lifetime opportunity is just, yeah, that was definitely the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Great. We actually just have one more question from France sneak in. She said, what do you do when you're not traveling to Iceland?
Oh, well, I do like to travel, so I'm trying to slowly get to all 7 continents. I'm going to Africa in 3 weeks. So one of the guides I met in Antarctica, his friend is taking a small group of people, so that's exciting. And I do a lot of artwork. So in addition to photography, I do stained glass, and I actually did a pastel painting for my show that I'm putting up this Friday. So a lot of artistic, creative things.
Cool. You might have to give another Mountaineers presentation about your African adventures.
Absolutely. Yes, I hear that the big appeal is that because of COVID, nobody's there. And this guide said that basically there was nobody, you know, in the whole half of the Masai Mara on their side of the river. They were the only 2 people in the whole park. So
Wow.
just crazy. Yeah. So I'm very excited.
Nice. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Kristen, for your time and for sharing those wonderful photos and telling us about those experiences. Those are all of the questions I saw come in. We did get a few all at once, so if I missed yours, I apologize. But I hope that it was answered in the Q&A after. So again, thank you to the Mountaineers for hosting this meeting. Thank you all for tuning in. And if you'd like to tune in for any additional programs from Peak, be sure to visit our website, peaknature.org, and you'll find out more about our offerings. So thanks again, Kristen. Have a wonderful night, everyone.